This is Software Engineering Radio, the podcast for professional developers on the web at se-radio.net. SE Radio is brought to you by the IEEE Computer Society and by IEEE Software Magazine. Online at computer.org/software.
Hello, this is Marcus Blankenship for Software Engineering Radio. Today I have with me Bryan Helmig. Bryan is the CTO and co-founder of Zapier, a workflow automation tool used by over 2 million people to connect the work apps that they use every day. Prior to Zapier, Bryan worked in product development for Veterans United Home Loans. He's an alumni of University of Missouri at Columbia. I'll be talking with Bryan today about managing distributed engineering teams. Bryan, welcome to Software Engineering Radio.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here, Marcus.
I'm excited for this too. I also want to disclose that I'm currently a Zapier customer and in the past have applied for positions at that company. So let's begin with this. What is a distributed team, Bryan?
So a distributed team is exactly like it sounds, especially if you think of distributed systems, you think of any of that stuff. It's where you don't have your entire team co-located in one place. Everyone is really working from their own office, their own space, their own area. There's a lot of really cool stuff about that. It means you get to work with people all over the world. They're all really talented folks. You're not bound by some geographic area. There's lots of quality of life things that are great about it as well. There's no commute. There's a lot of really cool things like that. But in a nutshell, it means that you interact with people through work, much like we are over audio calls or VoIP calls, or you work with tools like Slack or GitHub to do all your work. And there's no central office. Certainly for us, we're 100% remote, 100% distributed. So there is no office. Some places, they kind of have a mix. You'll see that every now and then. But yeah, distributed just means no central office where everybody works at, right?
Yeah, that's really interesting. I've heard other people tell me that they were distributed, and what they meant was that their development team was distributed across 4 offices in the United States, or London, Texas, New York, California. That's what they meant by distributed. But you have no co-location at all.
Yeah, that's right. And I think there's probably a distinction because sometimes these terms sort of are interchangeable and used for different stuff. So for us, we say remote, we're 100% remote. And to us, that really signifies that every single person works remotely. There is no, like Denver office and like Bay Area office and New York office, which is commonly, I think, the other term or the other definition of the term like distributed that people, like we have distributed offices. So that I think is like the key distinction for what we would say, 100% remote versus distributed offices or other permutations within that. I mean, they're all kind of on the spectrum, I suppose. But for us, we're all the way down the line to 100% remote, no office. Everyone works from their own place. And we've been that way since the beginning.
I hear a lot of people talking that remote teams are harder to manage than co-located teams, where the manager can walk around and see what's happening. Do you think this is true?
I don't think so. I've worked in both environments, and I'll say humans are humans in both environments. So I'll say for sure, the challenges that you'll hit in scaling a company, you might hit a little bit sooner as a fully distributed, fully remote company. And I would say a great example, and certainly for Zapier, is how we communicate was something we had to codify and lock in a lot earlier than probably co-located companies can kind of get away with. You have kind of have everybody together and like they can tap each other on the shoulder and you can have those conversations in a very ad hoc manner. So you don't need to codify it as much. A little bit sooner, you need to codify it with a remote company and have kind of a culture and philosophy on how you do that. So we had to do that a little bit sooner. I don't know if I would really say it's harder. It's definitely a trade-off for sure. Because like on the other side, you get lots of amazing benefits from being remote. And we mentioned a few at the top. Those are things like no commute. You can hire, anyone in the world. If you find an amazing engineer in some small town in Ohio, they don't want to move. They have a family there or whatever. Then you can hire that person and they can work with you. whereas that wouldn't really be possible if you were co-located. So there's lots of benefits that you get, and I think there are some trade-offs that you have to be aware of so that you can approach it appropriately.
Yeah, I was going to ask, and you hit on this idea that there are some challenges. There's challenges in everything. So I was going to ask, what are the top 3 challenges in managing a distributed team? You mentioned that some of the things that companies who scale, some of the problems, you may get earlier. Are there a couple of others that come to mind as the big rocks people can expect to encounter if they start working on or using distributed remote team members?
Yeah, I would say for sure one challenge I've seen, especially for teams and companies that maybe aren't ready to go 100% remote, but want to, let's say, layer in a little bit remote and put, dip their toe in the water, so to say. A big challenge around that is when you have, I would say it turns into kind of cliques of like the in-office versus out-of-office folks. And if there's any like barriers of trust or any ways where stuff happens in the office that people feel left out, or there's like communication difficulties in the mediums and channels that naturally are in each environment, that can be particularly challenging. So one thing I would definitely call out, tips for that, I would make sure that you don't go with the pattern of having, let's say, managers who are co-located and the rest of the team who's completely remote. I think that adds like an arbitrary division there. I would try to keep entire teams remote if you could pull that off. I would say certainly for companies who want to introduce this, to think carefully about the channels they default to for communications. So let's say you're going to have a meeting, you're going to invite a bunch of people. Some are co-located, some are remote. If you just have everyone get together in that same room and they have that face-to-face physical intimacy that the people across the wire do not, that creates this artificial barrier. I know some companies like Fog Creek would have people go into different rooms and they would all be co-located but remote in how they would interact. And that would help level the playing field a little bit so that you kind of brought to the forefront this, the default medium is across the video chat rather than, something happening off camera or a comment made this way or a conversation that happened that the mic didn't quite catch, like those little things add up and aggregate to kind of harm the effectiveness of having remote and co-located together. So those are some of the things I'd be watching out for, especially around challenges and trying to mitigate those challenges.
Yeah, you hit onto the area I want to actually move into next. That's kind of the culture of remote company. We'll use the phrase remote and distributed interchangeably during this episode. So what are the key cultural elements for building effective remote teams, or in this case, an entire remote company?
Yeah, it's a great question. So at Zapier, we've definitely thought pretty critically about the values that we have in our culture. And we started from, I think everybody's been in a company that has the poster values. It's like, be excellent, achieve greatness, which they feel so empty that we call them poster values because they exist on a poster only, right? Ours are a little more behavioral driven and they're more, let's say, tuned to what we want and behaviors inside the org. One of the first examples, one of my favorite ones, it's our first value is default to action. We're remote, so we deal with time zones, we deal with people's availabilities. We definitely have a more, I would say, forgiveness over permission sort of a culture. And that's captured in default to action, where if you're not sure what to do exactly, maybe the person you really need the answer from is in a different time zone and they're not available, make your best guess. We would much rather you make a decision, move forward and be productive than kind of sit back and wait for the official word or anything like that. And that's a behavior that we can opt into as an organization. And a great value is something where you could take the opposite. Let's say you're in a regulated environment, defaulting to action and making a call without all the information, especially with life and limb is at stake, probably not a great value for your company, right? Not something you want to do. So for us, it really speaks to the culture we want to create. We want people to unblock themselves. We want them to make best guesses. We want them to act autonomously. And that value encodes those behaviors. And you can see it playing out all the time. You'll see it in our Slack room, someone will be like, ask a question and they won't get a response for like 20 minutes. And they'll be like, we have emojis that are like DTA, default to action. Like, I'm just defaulting to action with this. Someone yell at me if I shouldn't, or like whatever, right? And at that point, they're unblocked, they're moving forward. They've put a flag in the sand of like, hey, if someone wants to revisit this, I'm open, but I'm going to continue moving forward. And that's a really healthy thing to have in a distributed remote environment, because you can't have people blocked because, you know, the world has to spin an entire time around for the next person to come online. So that's an example of how adding some very specific cultural values and behaviors can really drive how a remote organization thrives and communicates.
Are there any other key cultures that you're trying to build? I really like that one. I just wonder, are there a couple of others you could share with us that you have found, especially with remote teams, are really critical? Yeah,
absolutely. Another of our values is default to transparency. That doesn't mean everything's transparent. And in fact, there is a spectrum. There's some optimal position on the spectrum where if you're too transparent and every single thing you ever do goes into the room and you're talking to everybody and like just pinging, like going crazy there, that's too much, right? Like, so there's this aspect of being transparent, but also like aggressively summarizing and making sure to pull in the right people at the right time, to be more verbose, but doing it in bring the noise level down. There's lots of like techniques like that we've encoded inside of our culture around transparency that really help people gather context. So if you were offline because of the time zone difference, you can pop into a room and see some of the decisions that have been making, see some of the docs that have been opened up and some of the comments in there. This is the same for like GitHub and PRs. Like, there's probably lots of places in your organization as well. You're already doing some of this stuff, but we try to encode it into a lot of the day-to-day behaviors as well. And for default to transparency, like I said, it's a spectrum. There's places where it might be too far, right? Like it doesn't mean everything's transparent. It means that by default, you probably want to make it transparent. But if you have a good reason not to, then it doesn't need to be transparent. So there's a practicality embedded in that. And one thing we've often done is like listed out a couple examples of places and behaviors that fall in line with these. And that really helps the team kind of internalize these and convert sometimes abstract ideas into specific behaviors, which is always challenging. So we've done things to help bridge that gap a little bit as well.
You've mentioned the terms codifying and encoding, which makes me think that somewhere these things might be written down.
Yes.
Maybe not on a poster, but
no.
But I'm curious, when someone joins a traditional company, they walk in the door, they may go through an onboarding employee orientation process. They will immediately get a sense of what's accepted by the way their team members talk and the environment they're in. But in this case, your team members might be in coffee shops, bedrooms, home offices all over the world. How do you communicate and teach these cultural values to new people?
That's a great question. This is something that we've been experimenting a bit with in 2019. Certainly it starts with the values. Certainly it starts there. And it starts with some of what I was talking about, like trying to turn seemingly abstract values into specific behaviors, both positive and negative. So kind of we show you, and I think there was I think Ben Horowitz had this like good product manager, bad product manager that kind of inspired that. Like here's a good example of defaulting to action. Here's a bad example where you're using it as an excuse to push something that shouldn't have, things like that. And we get specific. That really, really helps. But the place where we've been experimenting a bit in 2019 is leaning into our value of remote as a part of onboarding. So we used to do this thing where we would fly folks out to the Bay Area not every month, not everybody, but the new folks on the team, and kind of do a little bit of an onboarding week. And this worked really, really well. It helped us connect with all the new folks on the team, and we got to talk through some of these values and work together. And that was really, really great. But we kind of were looking at it like, is this really in alignment with how we think about remote? Like, we're a remote first company. Shouldn't we be able to onboard people in a remote way? And we kind of took that as a challenge to try to build out a remote first, like you join Zapier and you spend your first 3 months like remote, right? Like you are in it. And we tried to bake in some ideas around like graduated autonomy. So that first week, your time is pretty much like stacked. Like you're doing all kinds of stuff. You're learning about all the different things that we have going on. You're learning about some of the values, and not just, the abstract, but also, hey, here's like some specific behavior. Like we're going into that. And then each and every week we're backing off from, overbooking your calendar to giving you a little bit more time. If you're an engineer, now you're writing a little bit of code. You're working on this, you're working on that. If you're a product manager, you're starting to spec out some stuff. You're starting to work with like the team. If you're a manager, you're starting to take over one-on-ones, right? So we're kind of ramping this up over time, but you still have that foundational base that everyone had. And it's starting in remote as like the ground foundation for it. So that's something that's a little bit new in 2019. And so far, it's gone really, really well. A lot of the feedback, we do a lot of surveys inside of Zapier to figure out, how is this, how is that, very focused on different facets, and in this case, onboarding. And so far, things are looking pretty good. So I think if you spend the time to critically think about what people need to know during that onboarding phase and really embed your cultural values and the things you care about into that and let it shape it at a very fundamental level, then the values kind of come out during the onboarding and the transition phase into like doing your role day to day. And then it becomes just second nature. That was your introduction. That's how you live in Zapier. That's how Zapier meets you. So it feels very natural at that point.
It seems like when you do anything that changes the culture, the practices, whether it's dramatic or even small, there's an opportunity for some people to get out of the loop. I'm imagining manager X at your company who accidentally onboards somebody the old way because they didn't quite get the message that there was a new way to do things, and then they're frustrated. How do you overcome when things change, keeping especially key people like managers and leads who affect those below them, making sure that they're really informed and empowered with where you're going?
Well, I think that comes back to a little bit of what we were talking about with transparency. We're trying to do a better job at change management just in general, because again, we're back on the spectrum of like too transparent. Like if you pre-announce something that has some you sort of get this behavior of, oh, that's changing. I'll just pause my work on that then until that lands, right? And that's a very natural sort of behavior. We want to avoid that sort of thing, but we also don't want to hide stuff. So there's this delicate balance around that, around really trying to put to the forefront, hey, here's the things we're looking at and the stuff that we want to improve, and talking about maybe some of the places that our current process is failing or isn't in alignment with some of our values, and some of the ways that we can improve it, and then really trying to hone in on a rollout plan and an action plan for that, so that people know when it's coming, but they also having some of that awareness that it's coming. You can even call out like, hey, this doesn't mean that things stop, right? That doesn't mean that we're going into pause mode while we figure this out. It just means we're looking at it. So that's a delicate balance. I don't think we've solved it, let's say, but we're definitely getting more practiced at it. And communication is a big part of that. I know we have some internal tools that we use that help communicate these sorts of things. We've started to bake in some company level metric stuff that really help guide and frame some of these conversations. So often the question is like, well, why are we changing this? And if you can point at some specific, like, well, we were trying to drive activation here, and because the team was structured this way or that way, it made it really hard to impact that, because we were looking at a 3 to 6 month roadmap rather than looking at the iteration and cadence of experiments or something like that. So now we have a framework in which to discuss those things, and that really helps give context as to why things are changing, which we found is often, if you have curious folks, they want to know why are we changing this? And if you can give a really solid reasoning and sequence of events that get you there, you get a lot of trust and ability to make a change, try an experiment, and lay in some of these optimizations over time.
Yeah, I want to move over to the topic of software development processes and quality. But before we do, I'm really curious. Lots of folks in our industry are familiar with Conway's Law and the idea that the way we're organized impacts the products we build, and there's a reflection there. Is that true of remote teams as well?
Yeah, I think so. And we lean into this. And I'll give you a really specific example of how we've leaned into certainly remote, but our product in and of itself is an automation tool. So we should be really big advocates and have a big passion for automation. So one of our values is actually don't be a robot, build the robot, where we dog food a ton of this. Like if you were to hop into a Slack room inside of Zapier, there are bots running all over doing all kinds of stuff for people. And we've tried to structure our company around the things we want to embed into the product and the way we build a product. And that's like an example of something that maybe, I think Conway's Law often alludes to, the fundamental architecture of maybe software or something like that. But we think of it even one layer above that, like what's the output of what we're trying to build in terms of the product, and how do we bake that into our culture? Another big one that we've done since the beginning and we still do, that I love doing and is actually a pretty big hit for everyone, is everybody does support at Zapier. So every single week or every 2 weeks, it depends on what schedule you're on, we do what we call is all hands support. It means everyone hops in, starts helping customers. And it's amazing the kinds of stuff people are doing with the product. But it's also amazing when they hit little bumps and they hit little places of friction, how much empathy it gives us. Because if you're working on the code that maybe is producing a bug, to see how that bug hits people really helps close that feedback loop. Or on the positive side, if you ship something that really helps someone and then you later see a couple weeks later someone saying, "Thank you, that's amazing. I can't believe I'm able to do XYZ as a result of that." It really helps close the loop there. But this is not just for software engineers. This is everyone. So all execs do it. All marketing folks do it. All the biz dev folks do. You name it, everyone's doing support at some part of time at Zapier. So that, again, building structures, building a culture around supporting the product and supporting the customer is kind of the level at which I think Conway's Law could really be put to like good effect versus just a strictly engineering sense, which is how I traditionally thought about it.
Let's shift over to the topic of software development quality. Is it harder to build software in a remote environment?
No, I don't think so. And in fact, I think that a remote environment's a bit more conducive to the ways that, let's say, engineers work. Everyone's probably super familiar with the huge success of open source as like a model. That is almost exclusively done with folks who are working remotely on particular things. And I can't think of a bigger movement in software than that. So I feel like it's pretty natural, and that's pretty good evidence that it is. But even if you just think of how engineers work on a day-to-day basis, you want to control your environment. You want to like zone in on stuff. You want to drop distractions in an open office environment or layout, or if you have to commute somewhere, it eats up into that attention that you have. So we've definitely noticed that engineers in particular really enjoy working remote. You can be in a quiet room. You can control the heat. You don't have to listen to someone playing music that's distracting to you. You don't have to listen to sales calls happening a cubicle over or whatever. That I think is really, really powerful. And all the tools for building software, it's all digital artifacts, right? Like you're creating code, you're uploading it to GitHub or GitLab. You're reviewing it there. You're living in the digital realm. You're living over the web and over the internet already. So kind of making that the base foundational place where work happens is not a stretch, I don't feel like that's that crazy. I know a lot of times, certainly folks who have maybe seen remote not work well in a co-located mixed environment or maybe haven't done it before, kind of have this gut reaction of like, how could that possibly work if you can't see someone, in their seat, right? And I just think that's a fundamentally flawed way to look at how people are productive. Whereas like you can see what someone, like if someone has a PR open and the code is doing what it needs to do and it's getting reviewed the way it needs to do and it's getting shipped in a remote environment, there's no difference, right? In fact, you get to emphasize a lot of the strengths there. So to us, we feel like software development in particular is something that is bolstered in a great way by a remote.
Which Agile ceremonies do you use, and how have you altered them to be remote first friendly?
Yeah, so we're not really dictatorial on like Agile or Scrum or any of the processes. We tend to encourage teams find a pattern that works well for them, and we try to have the interfaces out to the rest of the org be a little bit clearer. So things like dates that you're going to ship something, especially if another team has something that they need, they have a reliance on you. That's something you'll need to export in a consistent way. But how you get the work done, that's more of a team decision. A classic, difference is a product team that has a very defined like roadmap versus a infrastructure team that is very much dealing with things that are popping up as team needs this or needs that. And that's a very Scrum versus Kanban style like divide. Whichever one works is great. But at the end of the day, we still need to be able to communicate and export some of those common interfaces. So we try to pay attention to that more so than the particulars of how work gets done. That said, we do like to have some consistency. So if you just want to pop something off the shelf and be like, oh, we're just going to do this, and you just want to go with that, fine. Like that works really, really well. And you can just kind of lean into that. And you get some nice benefits if you have engineers that swap between teams or are going to hop in and help you out with this or that. It'll feel very natural, and that's good. So we do see some value around consistency, but we don't enforce consistency for consistency's sake, if that makes sense.
Yeah, are there some favorite ceremonies? Do people do stand-ups? Do you do them asynchronously? Do you use retrospectives? Do you do estimation? I'm just curious, what have you found that's actually working that many teams or maybe some of your best teams have leveraged?
Yeah, so we definitely do grooming meetings where we try to get everybody together, and this kind of comes back to some of the time zone stuff. We try to make sure that there's some overlap so those conversations can happen. Let's say the other place that I would say that we have a consistency is the medium in which you communicate needs to be on the more asynchronous side. I would say Slack is not often the best place for that because by the time you wake up, it's slid on. There's a million you got to catch up on. It's unrealistic to think that everybody can stay on top of every message that comes through Slack. So that's not the place to default to conversation. Well, maybe not conversations, but certainly decisions being made or kind of like where artifacts should live because they're not discoverable. It's an okay place to have like a one-on-one conversation of trying to like get down to a decision, but it needs to be pushed into a tool like Jira or something like that. So we've often had, the mechanism of where decisions get made, push those into tools that are more asynchronous and more evergreen-esque. Is like a big aspect of what we do. But overall, I think remote gives you the flexibility to try and like play with a couple of these things. We don't have rules around daily stand-ups, for example. If teams find that really useful, that's great. I know a lot of teams do Slack handoffs where at the end of the day, they'll do a handoff and they'll tag it as such, and then they'll just summarize some of the stuff they did that day, some of the stuff they need for the next day. And that's a way for them to communicate where they're at with each other. So those are some things that have kind of caught on and spread between teams. But again, they're not enforced in any way.
In traditional companies, one of the challenges that I see is when teams need to make technical decisions together. Sometimes it's the most opinionated person, the most highly paid person, the person who's the architect. There's lots of different dynamics around team decision making. Is there a particular best practice you've found for how your teams make technical decisions?
So the best way is that the technical decisions, or how technical decisions get made, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So we try to have as much of a bottoms-up approach to some of these decisions as we can. We find that makes people more autonomous. It helps them make the decisions that are okay or make sense for them locally. We have leaned into using more frameworks around helping people. I want to say like the DAISY models, things like that help people kind of dictate where the bounds are of some of these decisions. And if it's, in a lot of cases, it might be an individual engineer. You could be the driver, the approver, the contributor, and the informed parties of a particular decision you're making. So you can just like go nuts on that and you don't have to pull in a bunch of people. But if you're going to cross boundaries into another team, Now you're starting to pull in, certainly has to be informed that this is changing, but you might want them to contribute as well. Like you start to pull in other people and like raise the scope of these sorts of things. And we have people inside the org. We're doing a little bit better job here in 2019 that can help you think through some of that. So instead of them automatically being the approver or whoever, like maybe that architect in that case, they might actually come in and be like, oh, actually, no, you can just make this call. And that might be the sort of support that they give you, just to kind of give you a second pair of eyes, so to say, on a decision you might make. So this is something that we're learning a lot more about in 2019 than we have in the past. And so far it's going pretty well, kind of like providing those bounds, and some examples I think also really help play into that. Because this is something that as you get bigger, it becomes a bigger issue. When you're smaller, everyone kind of knows what's going on, so you kind of get away with it. But there is a transition when you past a dozen or so people working on a single area in a code base, like it starts to really push you to do this.
One of the challenges I've seen engineering teams have is collaborating and working effectively with the product teams. This is in co-located startups, all kinds of different companies. It seems like sometimes engineering and product aren't communicating well, that there can be some challenges. Do you find any particular challenges that the engineering teams have working with product teams in remote environments?
No, I don't think there's particular ones that are unique to remote. This is something that we're trying to improve upon in, again, this year is a big focus, is trying to get, we kind of call it the trio or a trifecta or triforce. It depends on who's talking about it, where engineering, product, and design we want it to feel like when you enter one of those grooming meetings or whatever, you're not really sure who's the product person, who's the engineer, who's the design, because everyone has like a similar level of understanding and stake and pushing on stuff. And that is something that we're certainly like early in the stages of rolling out at Zapier. But it's something that is certainly aspirational for us. And some of the things that we've certainly seen in the past, we've had a lot more product driven around kind of roadmaps, engineering around the code, design around the CSS or the markup. And those have they're not silos, it's not the right word for it, but certainly the area of focus, but kind of pulling them all together and kind of making sure that people care about across the line. So designers can, make an argument for reducing some tech debt over here and really push for that. Whereas an engineer might look at some of the roadmap stuff and make an argument for pulling out some refactoring and saying, actually, there's a simpler way we can test this, and here's how it might look like. Those kinds of interesting advocates are things that we're trying to make room for sort of in the organization. So this is stuff I think we're early in the process at discovering. So it's something that maybe in another year, if I came back on, I might have a little more insight into.
Well, that'd be great. Let's switch over to managing these teams. Are there special challenges your managers face when managing remote teams?
It's a good question. Like I said, I think humans are humans in both remote and co-located environments. So a lot of the stuff that you would deal with in a co-located environment exists in remote. In a few cases, you might see the elimination of a few things. It's really funny. There's a great podcast out there for managers called Manager Toolkit, I believe. And great podcast, has a ton of really good stuff. And they'll just they have a bunch of episodes. They'll just kind of walk you through a bunch of scenarios and just give you some context on how other people deal with this. And some of the interesting ones they have on there is someone who maybe has a body odor issue or something of that sort, right? So those are things you can very comfortably be like, okay, I'm not going to have to deal with that. So that's, I think, something that you can look forward to, is that that's not a part of the awkward conversations you have to have. But when it comes to career growth, when it comes to working with teammates, being active on a team, those sorts of things, there's not a huge difference in what you need to do as a manager there. We lean into weekly one-on-ones. We make sure that happens every single week for every direct report. We make sure that everybody has kind of that team that they're focused on, that there's clarity about who you're working with and who like your first team is. Things like that are things that, again, aren't unique to remote, but are, top of mind for us. So I'm struggling to think of something that's like really uniquely remote. if anything, it might be the emphasis on written communication and being clear. For me, I know like I'll start writing out a comment on, let's say, GitHub, and I'll find myself revising it 3 or 4 times before I post it, because I want the particulars of the point to be made clearly and concisely. So I'll be very particular about how I communicate in a text form. And I think that sort of behavior is stuff that makes anyone inside of a remote org more effective. And those might be the places where you would see a disproportionate amount of time being spent by a manager in a remote org versus someone in a co-located org. But overall, I think the basics are still there. It's not going to be a massive delta between one or the other.
Is there an equivalent to the management practice of walking around and listening, which is common when you can walk around the cubicle farms and just listen for problems?
Yeah, there definitely is. Some of this is like serendipitous, where you try to create these sorts of opportunities, and some is more, I would say, defined. One of the ones that we have that kind of combines both is we use a tool called, I think it's called Donut, where we do pair buddies. Every single week, it randomly pairs you with, it used to be one other person, but now I think it's groups of three people. And it says, hey, you should meet this week. And you might meet with the support person and an exec. And that might be your group for that week. You get on, you just chat about various things that are happening. And that gives you a little bit of that kind of walking around the office sort of a feel. We really encourage folks to get good at raising the bandwidth, is something that we often say around conversations that happen in rooms. So a classic example here would be you're chatting in a Slack room, you're talking about something, and you see yourself going back and forth. And maybe a thread in Slack has gone to like 30 replies back and forth. Like that might be a signal that you should raise the bandwidth, and you can start pulling in people for sort of ad hoc meetings over, let's say, a Zoom call. And that will let you go a little bit deeper, have a higher bandwidth situation. And then once you get to a consensus or a decision or something to move forward on, you can close down the call and summarize back in that thread. And that kind of gives you the opportunity to pull people in that you may not be discussing some of those finer points with all the time, that would have traditionally stayed on Slack or would have traditionally stayed in some written medium, and get them onto a call and like dive into something. So that's stuff that you'll see inside of Zapier as well. That really helps. But I mean, overall, like we really try to build ways for asynchronous things like that to happen. We have a lot of tools literally called async, where people can post their updates. It's kind of a mix of, let's say, Reddit meets Twitter meets WordPress. So you can see the kinds of things that are trending inside the company, which give you a little bit of insight into other stuff that's happening in a kind of structured way, but also kind of serendipitous way that gets you a bit of that vibe of like, oh, this person was working on this cool thing and I overheard it. I got to dive into it and learn more about some of the problems. That you get a little bit of that as well, because we encourage people to post about some of the challenges they had that week, some of the learnings they had that week, reflect on that. And it's a great way for people to get a bit of an insight into that across the board.
At most other companies I've worked at, we tried to adopt wikis, or we tried to adopt some written kinds of communication, and we use Slack and things like that. It seems like, especially when it comes to this tool you mentioned, async, while I don't know exactly what that is, it seems like in my experience, about 20% of the people generate 80% of the content. Do you find the same thing? Or with remote teams, is it really that everyone is fully bought in? And if not, how do you encourage the folks who aren't as active to participate?
It's a great question. And it depends on who you need to be your audience for a lot of these things. And in some cases, it might be okay to have a little bit of like 80% of the reads are co-located and 20% of the posts. That might be okay. It really depends on what the distribution is. So for us, a lot of these posts are really intended for your first team. So that might mean that a really successful async post was read by 20 people, right? Versus, something that the whole company read, right? The audience kind of matters there, and we try to remind people of that. And we've made some changes. Like over time, I think we've hidden like some read counts and view counts and percent. Like we used to have more things like percent of company that read this, and that kind of gave the wrong signal for those sorts of things. That wasn't the intentionality. So a lot of these things are really kind of about setting expectations for what is necessary for these sorts of different modes of communication. Certainly for async, we do these weekly updates, and those are for everyone to reflect on challenges they've had, things they're excited about, stuff they're working on. And those are really for your team and sometimes for folks outside of it to get insight into what's going on. When you kind of look at it that way as like the intent for that, I think it works pretty well. We try to have everybody post regularly on that. That's like kind of foundation is just like, hey, everybody should be doing like a weekly update. When it comes more to how many people read it, we try to keep people, we try to keep expectations in line so people can feel like, oh, this was a successful post, even if only maybe a dozen people, but a dozen of the right people read it, and that's what matters.
What things should managers look out for to indicate that somebody's struggling?
That's a great question. I would say it's easy in a remote environment to get very quiet and be very heads down. So if you haven't heard from someone or seen what they've been producing, that's usually a pretty good signal. It doesn't mean you necessarily need to, and this is not the same as like micromanaging. This is just like checking up and being like, hey, what's going on here? That I think is often like an early sign of something. This is often one of the first bits of advice I certainly give engineers in remote environments is there's a tendency for everyone certainly to have the appearance of like, oh, I got things under control. Whereas like questions erode that. Like if you're in a Slack room asking a million questions, the feeling that they put on themselves is often like, oh, I'm being a pest, or I'm signaling that I don't know what's going on, or something like that. And I found this is particularly pernicious for engineers. This is not a good behavior to have in a remote environment, and especially for someone who's new in an organization. So I kind of like set an expectation of if you're not asking, a half dozen to a dozen questions every day as a new engineer, like that's probably a signal that you're going a little too Rambo or heads down or hero mode or whatever you want to call it, where you're trying to live up to some expectation that is not real. So that's something that I often point out, and that uses signals like how active are they in the room that they're supposed to be active in, how many questions are they asking, those sorts of things, and those can be really, really helpful. So those are stuff that I would be like looking at for an engineer. Certainly is how active are they, especially in the early days, because you're trying to set those how would you say those behaviors and those traditions for how that person's going to operate. If it starts off that way where it's very quiet, it tends to continue that, and that's not often an optimal way to work in a remote environment.
I want to move to a question that's generally a pretty hard situation for managers, and that's when people aren't performing well,
right? And
we have to take the next step. What kinds of steps does your company take, or what kind of steps do you recommend remote companies take to help people get back on track or to eventually fire them?
Yeah, always difficult, right? And I would go back to what we were saying before. There's not any like secret sauce for remote that doesn't exist in probably a co-located environment. The core maxim we have around performance can be probably summed up with no surprises, right? Where we want to be very fast on feedback. We want to be very clear on feedback. And if you have a hard conversation, let's say with an engineer, like, hey, this performance is not great. We need to escalate this to the next level. And whether that's like a performance improvement plan or whatever, something more formalized, that engineer's response will be like, I kind of thought that this was coming, right? If that's the feeling that each of those like points of escalation have, then you're not surprising the person, and that's a good sign. So for us, it's all about fast feedback. It's all about no surprises. It's all about clarity and having those kind of tough conversations early and soon. And I don't think that's like a uniquely remote phenomena. There might be some like, let's just say strategy things or tactic things on how you discuss or broach these in a, maybe not face to face, you're on a video call or something like that. But we found that just being very direct, providing notes and summaries and written kind of like recaps of what you talked about, and having some of that I would say like breadcrumbs for that engineer to be like reflecting on and knowing where is the bar, where am I falling short is really important. Maybe more so in a remote environment, although I would argue you should be doing that regardless. But those are some of the things that we're certainly thinking of when we think of remote performance management, let's say.
A difficult topic for sure. Let's move over to collaboration. A few times you've mentioned the idea of asynchronous behaviors. Would you say that your company is a synchronous remote company or an asynchronous remote company?
I would say we strive to be asynchronous as much as possible. There are some necessarily synchronous portions of work we do. Those, I think, get captured in things like grooming meetings, right? Where you try to get everyone together and discuss the plan and like break down some of the work and get estimates figured out. Those are might be able to be done asynchronously, but we found that they work pretty well in a synchronous manner. It seems like there's always some aspect that needs to be done in a synchronous manner. So having that overlap, let's say for a team, an hour or two in their time zone distribution is really, really important because that synchronous stuff is always kind of there. But as much of it that we can push to asynchronous as possible, we try to do that. You'll see things like retrospectives. We'll try to do a lot of the prep in an asynchronous manner and then get everybody on a call and recap and debrief on it in a synchronous manner. And then we'll summarize and share in an asynchronous manner, right? So we try to have a bit of a hybrid around some of these things and try to use them as best they can. So I would definitely say we strive to be as much asynchronous as possible. But if there is some synchronous components, we recognize that and we try to minimize them, but we certainly try to put them all together so that we can optimize our time best as possible. That's generally been our approach. I think we're getting better over the years as well.
Do you keep common working hours? It sounds like there's some amount of that. And does it matter where you live to you if you can keep those common working hours? It seems like there might be a difference between someone's sort of default time zone maybe is Western European, but they're really willing, they're a night owl, so they're willing to stay up and be on US time. Do you care about that?
We care about it to the degree that you're consistent and predictable. And that doesn't mean always. Like sometimes you're like, hey, I have to go do XYZ, therefore I'm kind of shift my day. No problem. As long as you're kind of communicating that with your team, that is not an issue. Grossly inconsistent scheduling can be a source of friction for a team because if they assume that you're going to be available at this time or that time and you're not, then that can just throw a wrench in things. So if that's like a consistent theme, that can be a problem. We don't have core hours in the sense that everybody has to work these hours or anything like that. That's not compatible with like a fully distributed remote environment, I don't believe. And in some places you can really take advantage of that time zone diversity. A great example is SRE or infrastructure teams. When you have to carry the pager, it's much nicer to carry them during working hours, right? You don't want to wake up at 3 a.m. to servers blowing up. So there are some cases where you can actually use time zones to your advantage and have that kind of distributed portion of the workforce take advantage of that. So we do try to be strategic about like time zones and working hours. But again, we try not to be dictatorial about it. We ask for consistency and predictability in working hours above a lot of everything else.
Let me paint this scenario about collaboration and communication. Imagine you've got a developer who's got a great idea. Maybe the current coding style doesn't work for them, or they've stumbled upon something and they propose a refinement. They have an idea for a refinement. They figure someone else must be having this problem too. How does an idea that starts with one developer, which probably happens every day, go through a process that impacts the entire company, especially when everyone's remote and you can't just get that person to stand up and yell, "Eureka, let's do it this way"?
Yeah, it's a great question and something we are working on still. So don't take anything I say here as being the solution. Certainly for us, I haven't found it to be true that we figured it out. I think it comes back to a little bit of what we were talking about with the DAISY stuff. How much of that can be something you can just decide to do? Does that break? Is it kind of additive or does it fundamentally subvert something we're doing? Because that can give you the ability to try it out in your team, or maybe just for yourself. And that's a great way to get started. And that's alignment with some of our values around default to action. If it's something where you're like, I think we should move all of our data to, a different database. Like, all right, that's probably not something you as a team can do. That doesn't mean we shouldn't discuss it, but that just means that, hey, maybe get an architect involved to kind of figure out how the conversation and who should be involved and kind of scope that out. We have mechanisms by which whenever something escapes a team, let's say, as soon as it's cross team, we modeled this thing after Python. The Python community had PEPs, Python improvement, or is it Python improvement process? I can't remember what it was. But anyways, if you Google it, you'll probably find it. Google will correct you. But we modeled after that, and we call them ZEPs, Zapier enhancement proposal is what we call them. And that would be something where you can formulate that. You can create a README. It's a markdown doc that lives in a GitHub. So you can see all the changes over time. It's version controlled. You can tag people. You can have a code review effectively as a part of that. And that's really for when the contributors of, let's say, a DAISY model, I'm going to go back to that again, cross teams or really impact lots of people. And that has escalated outside of something that your team can decide on your own. And we try to scope those decisions down as much as we can, because we'd rather, let's say you want to change the way imports are done, let's say on the Python backend side, so that there's a little more isolation for apps and for modules. Well, that's something you might be able to try in your team and create a linting rule that only applies to the module that you're really working on, and start there. Try it out for a couple weeks, see how it goes, then escalate it up and say, hey, here's something we've been doing with this team. What does everyone else think about it? And at that point, it feels more natural because you have a little bit of evidence that it can work or that it's useful. You have certainly a working prototype, and you probably have a lot more insight into what it can help with and what it can't help with. And that is a much more fertile place to be starting from than strictly, I got an idea, eureka, right? Now everybody weigh in, right? So this is kind of defaulting to action and raising or increasing the scope of which that thing might impact is a really natural way for stuff to happen. That doesn't work for every single situation that you want to try, but it's a good place to start. And generally it makes it a little bit easier on everyone involved to kind of do it in that graduated manner.
I really like that. It also seems respectful of the fact that these good ideas do come from everywhere, and kind of allows anyone who wants to go through the work to write up one of these ZEPs. At least that's my guess. It gives them an outlet rather than just complaining about something.
100%. Yeah. And it doesn't always mean that your ZEP is going to get the right, you want the right people to look at it. It may not mean that everyone's going to weigh in, or it might die on the vine, let's say, right? And that's okay. We'd rather have ideas put out there without fear of certainly kind of this expectation that it has to go live or it has to happen, but instead, hey, it's a discussion. A lot of times stuff will pop up and we'll say, hey, we want to change the way deployments are done, and we'll talk about it, and we can't get to really a great consensus point, but it'll illuminate a couple very specific things in the deployment process. Maybe the way we do migrations, which is a little bit friction inducing. And so we'll say, okay, let's close this up because this is maybe trying to bite off too much. Let's roll these pieces of the conversation into another one and talk about that specific. So you can see these things sprout off and create new conversations. So it's always as a continuum of ideas and ways that we can be better, even though that one particular thing may not have been what we rolled out or what we landed on, or even got even remotely close to where we all agreed on it. But instead, we can still pick and pull out little good bits and remix those throughout the org. So we found that to be a pretty useful pattern. It's something we haven't perfected yet, but I think is probably on the directionally correct, let's say.
Everybody likes to talk about tools. What are the tools that remote teams just live and die by these days?
Well, I would say things like Zapier are really useful. If you're working often online with SaaS products, SaaS software, where all your work lives, having a tool to automate some of your life. I know, for me, right now, my Slack status says that I'm on a podcast, right? That's a Zap that's set up on my Google Calendar that automatically updates my status on Slack. It's an aggregate of your org having these behaviors and these automated things happening for you, which is really, really valuable. So I would say things like that, try to automate as much of your life as you can. And then try to figure out the places you want to communicate. For us, the first layer is probably Slack. It's where a lot of synchronous communication happens. It's where most stuff defaults to. We have some specialized tools. I mentioned that Async. We built that ourselves. It's like I said, it's kind of Reddit meets Twitter meets WordPress, where it's an internal thing. That's where a lot of conversations end up, and a lot of like retrospectives and change logs and Friday updates and like that goes in there. And that's a great place to put stuff. But we also have a lot of the other tooling that you're probably really familiar with, where work happens. We have the Jiras and the GitHubs and those sorts of things is where a lot of work happens. We use tools like Figma for the design side of things. We have lots of these like special best in class, best in breed tools for all those particular pieces. So it's not really dissimilar to what, again, other companies are already doing, like how a lot of their work exists. I mean, I bet you most co-located companies are writing code and pushing it to GitHub or GitLab, right? We do the same thing. So a lot of the stuff and a lot of the patterns that exist there are directly transferable to sort of the remote environment. You just might lean on it a bit more and might need to, encode some of the behaviors a little more specifically over time, rather than kind of being a more laissez-faire about them.
I don't think I heard you say email. This is something co-located teams use a lot of.
We do not use any email. I'm trying to think of the last email I sent to someone inside of Zapier that was literally just to them. I don't know if I'm trying to literally think of an example in the history of Zapier. The only times we ever do email is certainly external. So like when we were coordinating this call, of course, like you got to do email. Like that makes sense. That is probably the only place we use email. The only place we use email internally is maybe forwarding, like, hey, I got this email from a partner, forward it on. Can you take care of this kind of a thing? Maybe, but like 99.9% of our communication happens in Slack, especially inside of the organization. Yeah, I don't think we do. Email is not a thing that internal comms at Zapier leans on at all.
Let's round out this conversation with looking back a little bit. Knowing what you know now, as you guys have evolved and you've built this remote company, if you were going to start over, what would you do differently?
Always a interesting question, because I think we're just so fortunate. Like Zapier is such a cool product. It's something that we're all like really excited about, that I would hesitate to change much if it would change the outcome, right? Like, cause like we're just really lucky to have a product that resonates with as many people as it does and have such a great team, that I would be really careful messing with that. Some of the stuff that we did in the early days, like leaning into remote, I really think was the right call. Some of the stuff that I wish we probably would have done better, I don't know if I would say that it's unique to remote. I would say some of the stuff that I look back on and I wish we maybe would have put in place sooner might have been better career progression levels. Like we had titling was pretty flat titling in the sense, even though we did have hierarchy. We had managers and things like that. We believed in that, of course. But in terms of titling and growth, like it was pretty flat. And I think that makes it more difficult to have those conversations of growing folks. So that might be something I would have done a little bit sooner. In terms of the product, I think we've been pretty fortunate that the product itself we've never really pivoted. Like I know that's like a thing that like startups do, right? Like, oh, we pivoted. We've always been automation. Like we've always done that. We've been additive. So in the early days, it was just trigger to an action, right? And now we do many steps, right? So you can do as many actions as you want. So we've been always additive in the product. And then the architecture has always followed suit as a part of that. So there's never been any really massive pivots or like revelations where like, we should have done that in the beginning. So I would say we've been very fortunate that the product and the company and the folks we've hired have really been aligned, going in the right direction.
Bryan, thank you so much for joining us today on Software Engineering Radio. If people want to find out more about you or Zapier, where can they find you?
Yeah, you can find Zapier.com. We're hiring a bunch, so you can get a good insight into the stuff that we're doing there. We're hiring for managers, certainly Python devs, JavaScript devs. Even trying to fill out more of something new for us in 2019 is director level folks as well. So we're adding like new layers of management inside of Zapier, which is really exciting. So there's a lot of that. So that might be a good way for folks to engage with Zapier. Try out the product. We have a free sort of portion to it. I know folks here might be of the more engineering persuasion. We let you write JavaScript and Python steps inside your workflow. So you can do some really cool stuff. You can have action or triggers that happen off of Slack messages or whatever, and then run a little Python to go do this or that. I do a lot of that myself. So that might be ways for folks to kind of mess around and kind of inject some of this stuff into their lives. But of course, if folks have any questions for me, like all of our emails are on the website publicly. So I'm always happy to field questions. As you can tell, I kind of nerd out about a lot of this stuff. So I'll talk people's ears off on it. So
Thank you for your time.
Of course. Thank you, Marcus. Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to SE Radio, an educational program brought to you by IEEE Software Magazine. For more about the podcast, including other episodes, visit our website at se-radio.net. To provide feedback, you can comment on each episode on the website or reach us on LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, or through our Slack channel at seradio.slack.com. You can also email us at team@se-radio.net. This and all other episodes of SE Radio is licensed under Creative Commons License 2.5. Thanks for listening.